This is the skyline of northern Gaza, looking in from Israel. The distant thump of explosions and rattle of gunfire started up shortly after the truce expired at 7 a.m. local time. So let's get straight to Paul Hunter in Washington. Paul, those airstrikes have begun again.
Yeah, the war is back on, Adrienne. It would seem in full force. Mediators simply couldn't get the truce extended. Already, there are reports of rocket fire from Gaza, gunfire and explosions in northern Gaza, air raid sirens outside the Gaza Strip, and indeed, airstrikes by Israeli forces. The expectation, this could last weeks or months. Israel has already said this next phase would include targets in southern Gaza, which is now packed with hundreds of thousands of Gazans who fled the north since the start of the war last month. All of this just hours after what seems to have been the final release of hostages, at least for now. It is among the latest, perhaps among the last, Israeli hostage releases from Gaza by Hamas. Seemingly intent on making it memorable, staging the scene, drawing it out for cameras in central Gaza. But the result, when back in Israel, simple but absolute relief and joy. Here, one of the hostages in Gaza in the arms of her mother in Israel, finally. And as agreed, in exchange for the Israelis, more Palestinian detainees freed from Israeli prisons. These among the last of those, it's now presumed. Because apparently, having found no way forward, that 7-day truce has now expired. In Jerusalem, a sign of the rising tensions. Gunshots. 2 men opened fire at a bus stop, killing 3, with Hamas taking responsibility. A day after, Israeli forces killed at least 4 Palestinians in a raid in the West Bank, including, say Palestinian officials, an 8-year-old.
I want to express our appreciation for your support from the beginning.
Under pressure to extend the truce, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It was Blinken's 3rd visit to the region since October 7th. After all that devastation in northern Gaza, the result of the relentless Israeli assault after the Hamas attacks in October that killed thousands and displaced some 2 million, the message to Israel from the U.S., says Blinken, was clear.
It's imperative that Israel act in accordance with international humanitarian law and the laws of war.
Separately, Netanyahu reiterated his position on his country's response to the attacks that killed 1,200 Israelis. I've sworn to eradicate Hamas, he said. Nothing will stop us. Meanwhile, time ticks down on the truce as Gazans sifted through whatever's left of everything they ever knew. I just want a complete truce, she says. These men fled the north, seeking shelter when one of them was wounded, and their only hospital was destroyed, telling CBC, we can't handle it anymore, honestly. Honestly.
So, Paul, the U.S. Secretary of State seemed to be unusually blunt and very specific about the next phase of the war.
Yeah, and his comments also seem to suggest he was presuming the truce would not be extended. If so, he was right. But his message to Israel was forceful. Mainly, the U.S. wants Israel to protect Palestinian civilians in this next phase of the war. But he also had specific steps on that. Create safe zones for them. Allow people back into the north. Don't target hospitals. And Blinken also reopened with Israel the big question for when this war eventually ends, which is, then what? In many ways, Adrienne, that is the biggest and hardest question of all.
Absolutely. Paul Hunter in Washington.